If it is argued that when the body which causes dream ceases to be, dream ceases, then in the absence of the body there is no life in the other world, then surely there is no creation. What we've got here is a very brief attack on what we'd probably call the modern way of thinking. The modern way of thinking is that consciousness is completely dependent on the body. And it seems that this way of thought existed in ancient India as well, even though in Hinduism and Buddhism consciousness is given prime importance. In the Buddha's wheel of conditioned co-production, which gives the way that things arise in dependence of each other, the senses arise in dependence on consciousness. The senses and the body arise in dependence on consciousness. I remember the first time I read this, it didn't make any sense to me. I couldn't quite see how that worked at all, because I had the firm assumption, like most people do, that consciousness is dependent on the body. Consciousness is a property of our sophisticated brain. We have more self-consciousness because we've got a human brain, which is not necessarily bigger, but clearly more developed in some ways compared to the rest of the creatures on this planet. So it's presenting two arguments. That first sentence seems like the second phrase is implied by the first phrase, but I think it's just two arguments. One is that when the body ceases to be, dream ceases, and then the second argument is, in the absence of the body there is no life in the other world. In other words, there's no hereafter. There's no hereafter. Now this is so, surely there is no creation. This way of thinking, this modern way of thinking, it just doesn't stand up. It's a complete contradiction. It ignores the prime role of consciousness in fabricating and formulating our reality. Consciousness creates all the notions which it then firmly believes in. That's what's going on. That's clearly what's happening if you want to look at it. But we've had this persistent assumption which we're exposed to right from when we're very young, that there is an external world out there. That is what is real. Our imagination, our thoughts, our daydreams, these, we shouldn't get too caught up in them, otherwise we get a bit deranged. What's out there is what's real. The business of survival is what is real. This is what we get exposed to day after day. And the only reason we believe that is because of that constant conditioning that we've been exposed to. So it's not easy going beyond that conditioning. It's not easy believing in the primacy of consciousness, or it's not easy acknowledging the primacy of consciousness. Once you do see this, once you see what's going on, it becomes obvious, it becomes a fact. It seems crazy to dispute it. So this is why there is no creation. There is no creation without consciousness. There's no creation without awareness. If you think the world is just a mass of chemicals interacting with each other, and somehow these chemicals, this limited variety of chemicals, can get together in a way which produces consciousness. It's such a ridiculous story, that one, but that's the scientific story, or what some people regard as scientific. The truth is there's nothing scientific about it at all. It's only scientific in a very limited way. It's a physical story, that's what we should call it. It's a physical story. And it's physical in the sense that you believe in the material nature of subatomic particles, which is a highly dodgy foundation to base your assumptions on. So If it is said that the world has never been what it is not, then it does not exist even now. Well, this seems rather convoluted. It's really saying the world is as it's always been. And if at one point it did not exist, then it can't even exist now. So we've got a very cursory summing up of what is probably quite a profound philosophical point of view. We don't want to get into philosophical arguing about this, but this is what we've got here. If it is said that consciousness is an exudation of the body, etc., then the teachings of the scriptures become utterly useless. Clearly, if you believe that consciousness is simply an appendage, an epiphenomenon of the brain, then all of this is going to make no sense whatsoever. The teachings of the Yoga Vasistha and also the great Buddhist wisdom scriptures and Zen Buddhist scriptures, all of that will make no sense if you believe that consciousness is somehow something which is tacked on to chemical processes. If you decide against their authority, why have any authority at all? Well, this is the authority of the scriptures, and this is a rather desperate statement. We don't slavishly follow the scriptures because they're an authority. We read the scriptures and we follow them because they're an expression of truth. And if they're not an expression of truth, then we dismiss them. If you accept that delusion exists as long as the body exists, then delusion becomes a reality. This looks like it's relating to the understanding that, or the belief that you cannot be enlightened and be in a body at the same time. It seems that there's a particular philosophical position being attacked here. But all the sentence is saying is that if you believe in the physical nature of the body, then this is delusion, and this delusion becomes your reality. If you fail to appreciate the notional nature of the body, then you live in a delusional reality. If consciousness arises in the body accidentally, why should not that consciousness realize its infinite nature? So even if you believe in that story of consciousness, that it's an epiphenomenon of matter, then you can still realize the infinite nature of consciousness by realizing that story is a notion, like all the other notions that you've got of a physical body and of consciousness being dependent on that body. These are all notions which exist within awareness, within consciousness. So that was a rather scrappy paragraph of bits and pieces. It was a sort of half-hearted philosophical justification. So we'll just press on. Anyhow, whatever consciousness becomes aware of within itself, it experiences, whether one calls it real or unreal. This is the basic point. It not just experiences, but consciousness identifies with whatever it becomes aware of, to the point that it disappears from the picture and there's only the identification, there's only the object, whether it's an imaginary object, a thought, or whether it's a physical object or some other notion. Therefore, in the first instance, the self-nature knows itself as consciousness on account of its own inherent movement. Then, on account of mental conditioning, vasana, it experiences deluded perception. Conditioned awareness is bondage. When there is no awareness of conditioning or conditioned awareness, there is nirvana. So that conditioned awareness is when our consciousness, or when consciousness is caught up in its own notions and believes in the reality, the external reality of these notions. That's bondage. And once we realize that process, once we see for ourselves that that's what's going on, and we can step aside from that and allow consciousness to realize its own nature directly, then this is nirvana.